next presentation here is from Adriana Ortiz and Juan Rocha Osornio, which is titled Integrating Digitally Mediated Action-Oriented Projects as a Pathway to Community-Engaged Spanish Language Learning. So whenever you two are ready, feel free to start your presentation. We're so glad to have you here. As usual, you have 15 minutes to present and then 5 minutes for questions and answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Adriana Ortiz, and I'm a PhD candidate for the Language and Literacy Education program here at OIC. Together, I will present with Dr. Rocha the preliminary results of how we integrated digitally mediated action-oriented approach projects as pathway to community-engaged language learners of Spanish in his class, linking theory and practice. And this was conducted during September 2020 until April 2021, this study. So next slide, Juan, please.
So we're going to go over the theoretical framework about this study that we conducted in my Spanish class, which was Accelerated Spanish through Community Engaged Learning. We're going to be talking about the methodology and how I was able to incorporate what Adriana is doing for her research on my class. And we'll talk about the findings, and we'll conclude with some conclusions and the pedagogical implications about doing this kind of research applied to a class that focuses on community engaged learning.
So I'm going to go over the theoretical framework very briefly, since I think the first presentation during this group covered the plurilingual pedagogies, and for the sake of time. So the conceptual foundation for our study is based on the action-oriented approach proposed by the CFR. I think we heard enough about the intercultural awareness that pluricultural pedagogies can have as an effect in the students, but I would like to highlight language activities, the domains in which these activities happen, and the competences needed to realize these activities. And among these competences, students need to realize general competences, communicative, of course, and linguistic, sociolinguistic, pragmatic, etc., plus communicative language activities. But I would like to say that we try to align this with the community engaged learning part of the model that defines this course, and is also based on a collaborative approach and provides the students with the opportunity to make connections between lived experiences and linguistic concepts. And Dr. Rocha will go further in this topic.
Right. Thank you, Adriana. So this is a course that I created 2 years ago. I started teaching this based on community engaged learning research. It has different approaches. The different authors have a different conception of what really is, but in the particular context of the University of Toronto Department of Spanish and Portuguese, community engaged learning is a term that we use to describe a teaching method that incorporates community involvement into coursework. So I've always been interested in having my students practice their Spanish with native speakers, and I want them to actually find out some of the issues pertaining to the Spanish-speaking community. Here in Toronto, we're very lucky to have a large community of Spanish speakers. So I want them to, yes, learn the language, but I also want them to learn about the issues that people, the Spanish-speaking people, are going through, to learn in a mutual way, in a beneficially mutual way. So that is not just my students learning Spanish, but the community organization is also being benefited by their work and what they're learning with the placement that they're doing. So pillars of community engaged learning, it addresses a specific community interest, problem of public concern. It includes working with and learning from a community partner. Our students are placed throughout the semester with, for example, a company that makes chocolate. They bring that chocolate from Latin America, and then they produce chocolate bars here in Canada. So they learn about the process and what this company is going through by bringing in these ingredients into Canada. They're also being connected. They integrate community engaged experiences with educational content. Some of our students placed in this component get to tutor kids 9 to 12, for example, and they help them with their homework. So they get to practice their Spanish, but they also get to practice their English at the same time. Another pillar of CEL, it includes structured, documented, critical reflection. So it's not just about placing the students and leaving them on their own. They have to reflect upon their experience, and they do it through reflection papers. And in this particular case, as we'll show you later with some of the sample work, students were able to reflect upon this on videos, because this was an asynchronous course that we had to come up with as a result of COVID-19. So we've been doing community engaged learning in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese since 2017, but I started doing just advanced Spanish at that time. And then I created this community engaged learning specific Spanish 120, which is a version of, it's a combined version of 100, which is the beginner's level, and the intermediate. So we are seeing more and more that students already have some knowledge of Spanish, but not to be placed in the intermediate level. So I created this course, but in addition to that, I decided, okay, let's have the community also involved. So the first time that I taught the course, I invited the community partners into the class. And then for the second version of the course, that is when COVID hit. So I had to come up with a plan B. And I thought, okay, well, let's see how it goes. But I also want to teach this course in an asynchronous way, because most of our courses in the department have been synchronous. And I would like to do a comparative study later on how students are learning when it's an asynchronous course or when it's a synchronous course. So we go into the next one here, the study. Adriana.
So as a pedagogical approach to prepare the students for the community engaged part of the course, we use 4 action-oriented projects. They were 5-hour length approximately, each of them. And the first 2 projects were done individually, and the students had the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the implementation of this new kind of design on the project, develop ownership and autonomy on their own learning, and reflect on their plurilingual and pluricultural identities through design activities. The other 2 projects were done in groups, specifically in pairs, that strengthen the same values that I just mentioned, but focusing on reflection, social interactions, and the expansion of their pluricultural knowledge. So the data that we collected is from students' work, from students' personal reflections. The design of some of the sub-activities were specifically about reflection, including, we did a survey at the end as well, an e-interview, and of course, teachers' observations. Next slide, please. So then the methodology for the development of this scenario had 2 specific phases. Phase 1 was the design of the task, and that it took us to the development of a design, the design of a pedagogical tool, which is the phase 2. So the first phase of this scenario development starts with the selection of an appropriate scenario that align with the specific objectives of the curriculum and, of course, students' needs. So Dr. Rocha selected the scenarios from the LinkedIn scenarios catalog, and the new realities of the asynchronous model and the change of his role made us realize that these scenarios had to be fully adapted. So for instance, digital tools were not going to be needed only as resources, but it was going to be the medium of instruction. The co-construction of knowledge, for example, through a collaborative work was being threatened with this new modality. So this was taken into consideration during the scenario adaptation. We needed to include activities that were authentic, more importantly, where all students' competences could be explored and developed. So trying to create these activities, we designed subtasks. There were 4 or 5 depending on the project, with the main goal oriented, of course, the idea of developing a final project. So each step in our case, in our design, required a small product, like the evidence of work. It could be a voicemail, a letter, an invitation, something to show that would help the student build towards the last final work. So this was key. Oh, not yet. So okay, this helped the teacher and the student with assessment. It helped the student self-assess their work, create new strategies. It helped the teacher evaluate during the process, not just for completed work. And it helped, and he was more involved. The teacher was more involved despite of the asynchronous form of this new class. So we integrated online features all the way through with non-linguistic competences, and all the required strategies that they should use were taken into consideration. So to translate this, to communicate this to a student, the map of the instructions for an individual project of this nature could be overwhelming for the students. So we had to come up with a way of communicating these objectives in a clear manner that included any learner and where anyone at all levels could develop their autonomy. So this resulted on the phase 2 of this scenario development. Not yet, sorry, it's okay. So it resulted in a task in the design of a pedagogical tool that we call Paso a Paso, and it contains resources, examples, links for grammatical accuracy, for vocabulary range, anything that a teacher would usually do. We call it Paso a Paso now. Now we can change the slide. Thank you. So the Paso a Paso or pedagogical digital tool was inspired by the linked action-oriented, I can't believe this, sorry, no, okay. Inspired by the linked action-oriented scenario template. This template that you see at the back of the slide is designed with teachers in mind. It includes learning goals, level, learning strategies, competences, checklists for students and teachers, etc. But we focus on the second part, which is in the middle of the slide of this template, that is part 2 scenario development. What we did is that we created a template that would include everything that the student needed to know. So it's student centered. We maintain the 3 columns. The first column, they need to know where they are. The second, what to do and why. And the third, it had all the possible, is how to go about it. So all the links and resources, etc. I'm going to go very quickly over the tool because of time. So we can go to the next, thank you. So this is the first page. It has a description of a scenario that we call Historias de mi Cocina, which was based in a community cookbook. So first the student gets to a general description of the scenario. And so basically they get immersed in a situated action, a storyline that is meaningful to them. And then they have the what, why, and how. So next, I think I'm going far. Okay, so the first step is this one. So I created these labels and I made it very visual because I knew I wouldn't be able to explain everything, but I would focus on this step of how we created authentic interaction and it worked very well. In-person students had to talk about food-related memories or traditions, etc., in a very informal and casual conversation that was being recorded. Errors were welcome, words in different languages were welcome, etc. So, and this was just a brainstorm meeting for the publishing of that menu at the end of the scenario. So if you can see, these are the competences, general, communicative, that were the focus on these scenarios, sociolinguistic and pragmatic. And as activities, they got to mediate, interact, produce text, etc. In the second, can we go to the next? The second step, the same. Here I'm going to highlight that they, through collaboration, co-constructed meeting. So it's very focused on mediation and production. So they mediated concepts, text, and communication. And in this case, one of the competences that were required for the successful completion of this was linguistic. So they needed to write a paragraph and it had to be good enough for a publication. So they figure out, they find their own resources, how to go about it and accomplish such goal. And then the third step, just to give you an idea, you have that. This one, can you go next, please? Yes, thank you. So this one, all the activities are included. The interaction and mediation are, the focus here. The recipes are shared for peer review, but not just peer review. They have to ask the partner to explain 2 of the techniques used in that recipe in the form of a voicemail. And then the second student will explain to the teacher or create a definition of what he understood from that voicemail. So it sounds complicated, but it's what we do every day. We negotiate communication and meaning. And the rest of the steps go on until the end. And Dr. Rocha will show you some sample of their work.
We only have 1
And
minute.
if you could wrap it up so we have time for questions, that would be fantastic.
Okay, well, here's some sample of student work. For example, in the project number 1, which was they had to create an invitation of a fall festival. So we had students scattered all around the world. Students who were in India, they talked about festivals that occur in their countries. Some students were in Italy, so they talk also about the festivals that they were familiar with. So students were very interested in finding each other's work. And we also had a scenario where they had to cook, actually, and I have video of that, but we don't have time to show it. But students were able to share their recipe with everybody in class, and they had to film themselves. And this was actually the most successful project out of all of them. Students were also able to build a sense of community in spite of this being an asynchronous course, because they had to work together on the 2 last projects. And it was also a way for me to see if this actually works in spite of the asynchronous conditions. And briefly, what I can conclude based on this is that us as language instructors, yes, COVID has taught us many things, but in particular, how to reevaluate our teaching practices. We cannot go back, or we shouldn't be going back to what we used to do. I wouldn't feel comfortable teaching the way that I used to be teaching pre-pandemic times. And particularly when it comes to online teaching and learning, action-oriented approach projects, I strongly believe that are a viable way to achieve the learning outcomes, and particularly when combined with a community-engaged learning component. So that when they are placed with a community organizer, community partner, it's not just a shock for them if they're doing this online. In person, it's easier because they're building that relationship in person, but online is challenging. So that's how this kind of project, I think, helped me as an instructor, and it helped also our students. Thank you very much for your time.